What does it take to become a sustainable enterprise? How do we do it? And why does it matter? Today I explore these questions further, and I hope to enthuse you to ask more questions on what it means to become a sustainable enterprise and the work to do to get there. I'm Rose Heathcote, Senior Lecturer and Head of Sustainable Enterprise at the University of Buckingham's Business School. I'm committed to taking our leaders into the future armed with skills to tackle the issues of our time. I spent 26 years studying how businesses transform through lean and operational excellence to become competitive, resilient enterprises. And I'm focused on building the capability to help organizations give back more than they take, becoming both profitable and prosperous. To become competitive enterprises that also preserve the planet for future generations will require a particular skill set. Leaders of the future and their teams need green and future skills to help them solve not only the known problems, but the unknown problems they'll face too. Topping the list on World Economic Forum's list is critical thinking and problem-solving skills, with emerging skills such as active learning, resilience, and flexibility making an appearance. I believe business schools have a significant role to play as we enter a new era, which is changing the landscape for all enterprises, large and small, at a rapid rate. In November 2020, Akio Toyoda of Toyota remarked on their financial results and described our time as an era of profound transformation. Well said, I thought at the time, because the landscape has changed and will continue to change significantly. More than ever, we need to plan for profoundly different scenarios, which means learning to adapt and reform at scale. And it won't matter if you're a large organization or a small one. Both need to prepare for changes in climate, new regulations and laws, competitor forces, customer expectations, investor demands, and pressure from employees to become more responsible. Why small companies? A study conducted by British Business Bank across 1,200 SMEs showed that individually small companies may have a relatively little impact. But in the context of carbon emissions, collectively, they make up almost half of emissions in the UK. Worse still, 53% of those surveyed felt that they were not yet ready to prioritize decarbonisation, whether it be from lack of skills or the finances to invest in innovation and new ways of doing business. Now, the IPCC report was released end of February and another one early April, revealing the adversity and vulnerability we face from the climate and biodiversity crisis, and pretty much what happens if we do nothing about it. In short, we have to halve greenhouse gas emissions this decade and scale up adaptation. Adaptation includes future-proofing supply chains to cope with disruptions from disasters, which we got a taste for during the pandemic. Now, the report highlights that going on as usual is not an option, that climate change is already more widespread and severe than we think. At just 1.1 degrees of warming, we already see widespread disruption. Drought, heat, floods, storms, wildfires, water shortages, to name a few. And even a target of 1.5 degrees C will not be safe for all. And as some regions become unsafe, so conflict rises, affecting way of life, way of business, intensifying disruption. It's important we understand that business survival is inextricably linked to planet health, and the cost of doing nothing is high. To quote the World Wildlife Fund, every business depends on the planet providing what we need free of charge, such as clean air and water, food, soil, benign climate, and productive seas. And think about the impact on your business as this changes, and what mitigation and adaptation will be needed. And if you were to start up your own business, what could you do early on? The reality is that pressure is mounting on business owners and leaders to take the climate and biodiversity crisis seriously and to build enterprises that tread lightly on the planet. Kate Raworth illustrates the boundaries that we need to stay within, a safe and just sweet spot to thrive. And organizations will need to study and understand what part they play in tipping performance towards shortfall and overshooting. By understanding how each business impacts on these boundaries across the value chain, we can work on the problem. And linking back to the slide on future skills, building the skills to see and solve these problems. For decades, businesses have been chasing the goal of profit and shareholder value, pushing for sales with little consideration for planetary impact. You only need to look at financial reporting standards, which nurture this behavior, to appreciate the extent of the problem. In the absence of some way for businesses to formally report on not only their financial performance, but also their sustainability or impact performance is key. Harvard Business School say that in the absence of impact-weighted accounts, we are creating the illusion that most commercial activities might have no impact. And although new standards are perhaps in the pipeline, such as weighted impact accounts, businesses need to find ways to decouple their business growth from the impact caused and be transparent about their holistic performance, changing how they measure their success. This is one of our big challenges. Decouple growth from planetary impact so that your sales, as they improve, your impact on the planetary boundaries is reduced. As you attract more customers, become more competitive, capture more of the market, and your company expands, your impact doesn't. And we have a narrow window of opportunity to cut our impact and scale adoption so that there really is no time to waste. The evidence presented to us is unequivocal, so it's no longer about why we should change or when we should get started, but rather we need to shift gears and channel our energy to the how of getting it done. And to begin, it helps to know what we're dealing with. How much emission? Where is the biggest offender in the value chain? What's our contribution to the problem? Where are the leverage points we can target whilst maintaining good economics? Remember, we need to balance profit and prosperity. Now, sustainability is a big word, and it involves much more than environmental focus. And many companies suffer from what some are calling carbon tunnel vision. But it certainly is one significant area to focus on, so I'll talk more about decarbonization next. But I urge you to be conscious of the other planetary boundaries of importance. The chart in front of you does not show all gases impacting warming, such as methane and nitrous gases, but from a supply chain perspective, this is pretty interesting to study. If we look at global greenhouse gas emissions by sector, we can see where much of the contribution sits. 73% of the pie is made up of energy emissions in industry, buildings, transport, and other sources. Of course, by reducing biodiversity, we decrease the capacity to deal with carbon emissions naturally. So this is just one view to consider. But you see where your organization might fit in and its influence on the supply chain, which will also influence where you measure your impact as a starting point. Taking a broader view and measuring CO2 equivalents, you can begin by identifying which activities release greenhouse gases and then categorize them into scopes. And these might include areas such as Scope 1, your boilers, furnaces, or your vehicles, or Scope 2, such as emissions associated with consumption of purchased electricity, heat, steam, or cooling, or at Scope 3, which occurs outside of your control, but you can influence, such as waste disposal or purchased fuels. Now, to understand your contribution to the 73%, for example, you need to measure your contribution. There's plenty freely available information to help you, and you then be in a position to set an emissions target and initiate structured, well-focused interventions. Perhaps doing what you can that's within your control first, then getting your own house in order, and then expanding to the wider system thereafter. In this way, you can capitalize on cost savings, you can demonstrate leadership, improve your brand recognition, and in an increasingly conscious marketplace, you can attract customers and you can attract greater talent in an increasingly conscious talent marketplace too. If you're starting a new business, this is trickier as you have no history to measure, but you may look at what similar organizations are doing or not doing as part of the discovery phase. But designing products and services that help companies solve carbon emission problems, this is a tremendous opportunity, a tremendous business opportunity for entrepreneurs and innovators. And up front, there are things startups can do to build sustainability in early. Think about how you will design in clean energy to power your operations. You could opt for energy efficient buildings and strategize the location of your operations to reduce distances or consider no distances at all. You might build partnerships to deal with your waste, for example, waste markets, or you might cycle your waste back into the operation. You could build partnerships in the business model that capitalize on the sharing economy, shared space, shared assets. With a bit of upfront creativity, you can capitalize on early adoption rather than undergoing the inevitable transformation later. Whether you're a large corporate, SME, or a startup, to achieve sustainable results will require a new way of thinking and doing. We've seen a series of revolutions over the centuries, which shows us where we've come from, what our impact has grown like, and what the future trajectory may look like depending on decisions we make now. In this era of profound change, we are shifting from the Industrial Revolution to the Digital Revolution to a Sustainability Revolution. And some might argue the sequence or what might be happening in parallel, but these changes all require a new way of thinking. Now, the Industrial Revolution brought with it advances in technology and improvements that have also brought with it significant rise in more efficient production and consumption, contributing to what David Attenborough terms the Great Acceleration. Further advancements took hold after the war as medicines, engineering, science, and communication progressed. And as mentioned in earlier slides, advancement without boundaries places tremendous pressure on our planetary limits. The condition we find ourselves in today is punctuated with historical milestones, leading us to this point of high impact. In the 18th century, the arrival of water power enabled mills to drive machinery significantly, raising productivity. The Industrial Revolution triggered when steam power took off, as did the use of fossil fuels, bringing with it rail, shipping, and air travel. Into the 20th century, we saw a ramp-up of telecom, space travel, consumerism, the internet, and smart devices. As described in Attenborough's book, environmental economists look for the next revolution to be the sustainability revolution, in which innovators create products that reduce impact and leaders stop subsidizing offending industries, where financial markets transform to fund this revolution, a condition already underway. As we approach the new era with incredible speed, we cannot continue with the comfortable business as usual methods. We have to think differently, place emphasis on different things, and lead and manage our businesses differently. We do this practically in our organizations by shifting the business model away from a take-make-waste model to a circular model, or at least one that puts back more than it takes. We build strategies that look long-term into the future to bring value to stakeholders, not just short-term perks and gains for shareholders. We build businesses that shift from shareholder is king and manage with command and control to a future-fit model that requires the stakeholder to be king, and servant leadership becomes a characterizing feature of leadership. Where leaders collaborate across value chains and make problem areas transparent so that employees know what to focus on. And the company can start working on breakthroughs and innovation, as well as developing smaller day-to-day improvements in the way people go about their work, shifting the needle on sustainable performance. To build businesses that are competitive and tread lightly on the planet, there are some key themes we can start to think about. Some organizations have not yet articulated the business case for sustainable change, and this makes it harder to convince the naysayers. There is sufficient evidence to support the business case for sustainability. It manifests in top-line growth, bottom-line improvement, and people asset attraction and retention. It also affects where investors place their funds. Forward-thinking companies employ ethical supplier contracts, and eco-conscious customers insist on sustainable performance. So it's only a matter of time before we see slow-to-change companies lose revenue over it. Wasting resources, energy, and capacity all costs money. Consuming unnecessary materials and tolerating poor yields costs money. Paying fines and penalties strains cash flow. Talent, especially the up-and-coming generation, they choose to work for ethical companies. Turning social problems into economic opportunities means the organization can actually do well by doing good. And to do this, we need people to work on it. Quite simply, large-scale change cannot be achieved in isolation, and it requires all hands on deck. Leaders are there to frame the challenge. They're there to position the sustainability priorities alongside all the others with equal, if not more importance, and then to help to integrate it into the daily work. Leaders also need to match the message they send out with their own personal actions, becoming the change they wish to see in others, as a great leader once said. Employees have their role to play and can help to get the house in order with their leaders' support. Once employees are clear on the priorities and incentivized, they will then work on the right activities. And finally, by thinking in systems, we can get cross-functional, cross-border collaborations together to solve problems across the value chain. So everyone, every day, working on problems that matter. This will take hearts, minds, and hands to shift performance across the value chain. Many companies operate in silos where departments and functions work only on the KPIs that actually matter to them. And to achieve large-scale change, we need all hands on deck. But we also need for everyone to row in the right direction at the right speed in order to move forward. None of these narrowly focused silos. So to articulate the goal in measurable terms, transparency and performance is pretty critical. It's about being honest and open about true impact. As I touched on earlier, if leaders frame the challenge well and they clarify metrics, if they align with performance contracts and ultimately maintain constancy of purpose, employees will actually work on the right problems. And if there's no common goal, there's no direction and no progress. And solving problems that matter means measuring what matters, and narrowly focusing on profit alone, as I mentioned, is not going to take us far in this challenge. The most significant contributor to global warming is carbon dioxide emissions and equivalents. How well do you understand current emissions across the supply chain, and what will you target? And depending on what you find, there are options, of which I'm going to talk about 4. First, you can target demand. Reducing consumption, yes, is bad for revenue, but the cost of doing nothing is high. What can you do to encourage responsible consumption? Second, target product and service designs. This is proactive. Influence the sustainable design of your offering and subsequent processes to then deliver it to customers. This could reduce emissions both when you make the product, but also when your customer uses it. Third, reactively optimize the supply chain, shifting from a take-make-waste model to a circular model. Map out the supply chain, target green waste. Fourth, leverage technology that enables sustainable performance. To accomplish this, employees will now need to be mobilized and equipped with those critical skills we spoke about. Plans and talk do not equal results. Follow-through is paramount, as well as positioning probes to check what is and what is not working at regular intervals. Following nested cycles of improvement, such as PDCA or Plan, Do, Check, Act, creates a line of sight from each project or each intervention directly to the common goal. No confusion as to which projects contribute to the right results. This is how we get the right things done and move closer to our targets. Perhaps I've left you with more questions than answers. We have an opportunity to recognize that an era of profound transformation requires a new way of thinking and action. It means better business models and better ways to measure what success looks like. It means finding our impact leverage points and getting this done together. And it applies to all size companies and startups. We cannot realize grand strategies by sending the wood and the nails downstream, hoping expectations will be met. We have to connect our strategies with on-the-ground everyday action, which means taking our people with us. This requires a commitment to learning, equipping employees and ourselves to make better decisions based on sound judgments. And to achieve this, we'll need to build the people who build the sustainable enterprises that put back more than they take, operating safely within planetary boundaries. This is the future of business. Thank you for your attention, and please do connect with me on LinkedIn should you wish to take this conversation further. I wish you all the best with your own sustainable transformation. Take care.